New drinking game. Every time I say so, you take a drink. If you're not dead by the end of the video, you get a free puppy. Hey guys, Joe here, and that little card you see behind me right there is a free card that I got from a gentleman on Craigslist when I sold him my GTX 980. Now, I'm not one to turn away free items, especially if I can use them. And that's the point of today's video. Is it a usable card? As you can see, it is a NVIDIA Quadro card. And specifically, this one is a Quadro 2000. I've done some research, and I would have to say that this is the GTX 750 Ti of its day. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the Quadro line of cards, Quadros are kind of to graphics cards as Xeons are to the Core i7, i5, i3 series, in that they are designed for workloads. That's why you don't see the GeForce logo on them, and they don't say GTX. They don't say anything to do with gaming, and they have their own drivers. Quadro cards are optimized for 3D rendering, CAD work, processing video, basic work stuff. This card is built on the GF106 GPU. And for those of you that know, that's FERMI. FERMI normally runs really hot, and we'll get back to that. But it's the same die, literally the same die, that is in the GTS 450. As such, it shares all of the same basic specs with the GTS 450. It has 192 CUDA cores. It has 1 GB of GDDR5 memory. It has a 128-bit memory bus. There are a few differences, and we'll get into that now. Number one, the Quadro 2000 does not require a 6-pin power adapter like the GTS 450 does. Because it's a 62-watt card, it actually can be run off the PCIe slot on the motherboard, which can supply up to 75 watts. For comparison, the GTS 450 requires a 6-pin power connector because it uses 106 watts. Not a humongous draw by any means, but it's more than a PCI slot can deliver. Because it only has the PCIe slot power, it is slightly slower than a GTS 450. Because it was never designed to be a gaming card, this Quadro is lacking some of the features that the GTS 450 has on it, such as DirectX 12 support. This only goes up to DirectX 11, which is fine because most things today still use DirectX 11. Because this card does not have a 6-pin power adapter on it, it doesn't have the power to run as fast as the GTS 450, even though it has the exact same die on it. The GTS 450 runs at a 738 MHz core clock. This card runs at a 626 MHz core clock. Additionally, there's no ability to change the power limit or temperature limits on this particular card, so I can't force more voltage into it because obviously there's no more voltage to be had out of the PCIe slot. I think it actually maxes out the slot. Even though it says it's a 62-watt card, it could be, you know, degradation of components inside. Maybe it's some resistance in the die itself over time, but I think it's using all of the available power it has just to run at the slight overclock I was able to get, which is 680 megahertz versus 626 megahertz. And as a correction, I think I said 3000 megahertz was the memory. It's not. It's actually only 2600 on this particular card. There could be a problem with this card in that it's not getting to its maximum memory potential. I'm going to keep goofing around with that and see what I can do. It's listed at 3000 megahertz on Wikipedia and NVIDIA's sites. However, this particular card will only go to 1361. Double that and you get 2720. So I'm actually running a little bit short. Don't know why. I'm going to be filming directly off the screen because that card can't handle using MSI Afterburner to record with. I've tried it, it tanks the FPS more than it already is. For my test bench, I'm using a Intel Core i7 3820. It has 16 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM, and it has a H100 water cooler, AIO. My system is overclocked to 3.85 gigahertz, and the graphics card, as mentioned before, is overclocked from 626 to 680 megahertz. I will show that to you right now. So as you can see, Quadro 2000 running at 680 megahertz and 1360 on the memory. You can also see that it's grayed out here. I have no core control, power limit, or temperature limit available to me. Additionally, this one is running the latest driver that this card supports, which is WICL 377.83. Well, now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and run a couple of benchmarks that I have here. The first benchmark we're going to run is Heaven benchmark, and that's for DirectX 11, and I have it set to low because that's about as good as it will support. It's set to run at the system resolution, which is 1080p right now. One difference that I notice with the Quadro cards versus the GTS or GTX cards is the fact that they always run at max speed. There is no ramp up to the 680 megahertz. Even when it's at idle, it's at 680 megahertz. Usually graphics cards will come down when the load is lower. We'll go ahead and pause now and come back when this is ready. Okay, now that the test is completed, I do want to point out that the graphics card only got up to 52 degrees Celsius, which is pretty good in comparison to what a normal FERMI can run at. It actually has a 100-degree temp limit on it, so it didn't even come close. The score is a 912 with an average FPS of 36.2. Now that does sound like it's a good score comparative to nothing, but when you compare it to the lowly 750 Ti, even the 1GB version, the 750 Ti returns a score of over 2,600 points. So yeah, that will tell you this is 2.5 times slower than a GTX 750 Ti. So opening up 3D Mark, it's going to suggest that we use Skydiver, which is actually surprising considering the low-end nature of this graphics card. However, it is detecting 1GB of GDDR5 RAM and DirectX 11 support, so it's going to suggest the best possible test it can on the parameters given to it by the computer. Benchmark is over, only took like 18 hours, and as you can see, it got a 4,659 point combined score. It got a graphics score of 4,273. To put that in comparison, a GTX 970 will get about a 13,000 point score, so well over 2 times, almost approaching 2.5 times faster. This averaged about 20 FPS throughout the test. The physics score is 8,693, pretty much irrelevant because we're not talking about the computer or the system as a whole, we're only talking about the graphics card. As you can also see, it does say validation warning. Using a Quadro driver says it's not approved, so it will not accept it as a valid score on their scoreboards. It is what it is. Next, we're going to load up GTA 5. So here we are in the graphics setting for GTA 5, and as you can also see, it's slightly over the available memory. It's a warning, it's not a hard limit. It doesn't mean you can't run it at that. However, you do have to ignore suggested limits. We are running in DirectX 11 mode, full screen, 1920 by 1080 at 60 Hz. Default, it will go to 50 Hz because it lowers the RAM usage, but not enough to matter. Population density and distance scaling, believe it or not, are not as important as population variety in this case. Everything is at normal or at its lowest settings in order to run. Now, I'm going to do some in-game play because I feel that's more realistic compared to the canned benchmark. So when you're in the city and you're driving around, you're going to see very high 30s, low 40 range for your FPS. And it does look good. And it's very playable. I've done some things where I've gotten the police involved and it still stays right around there. And the one thing that I would point out that I find pretty impressive is that the stuttering is pretty much non-existent. I've had SLI setups that stutter more than this. So yeah, even extreme movement like that doesn't seem to be breaking the game at all. So GTA 5 on a free graphics card. It works, but believe it or not, you can get a better experience out of this without sacrificing too much. Yeah, you could go all the way down to 720p, but you know what I prefer? 900p. Because at 900p, you get the high 40s, almost into the 50s. And yes, it does look like a Xbox 360, but it's still an even more playable experience with even smoother frame rates. If you're willing to go to 720p, you will get 60 FPS, but I'm not willing to drop that low. I can see all the textures and the edges as it is. So, thumbs up for GTA 5. Playable experience, yes? Yes, yay! Next, let's go into the standard Counter-Strike. Taking a look at the settings, we're running at 1920 by 1080, full screen of course, with medium details. Let's go ahead and jump into a offline game. I don't like to jump into an online game that I know I'm going to be quitting, because it's not fair to the other combatants. Now the thing that I find most impressive about the graphics card is the fact that it is a FERMI and it doesn't go over 58 degrees Celsius, even with that itty bitty fan. So yeah, it's designed to work, baby. Still averaging about 100 FPS or so. So I saw it drop down to about 72 FPS with a high of about 130. Again, 100% playable. If you're playing this game competitively, you will be able to compete. How's that for a nonsensical sentence phrase thingy? Conclusion time. I will not say go out and buy a Quadro 2000. There's no reason to. However, if you happen to have one laying around for free, it's a fun card to play with. And it serves another purpose. I have the 750 Ti in my AMD system, and I have a 460 laying around, I have a 550 Ti, I have 690s, all those cards, but they all require, except for the 750, they all require a 6-pin or 8 and 6-pin power connectors. I'd rather have a card like that I can just pop into a motherboard, fire it up, make sure the thing works, and move on. I'll probably never use that card for anything productive or for any kind of gaming because there's no point to it. But it's good to have something there. Before I go, does anybody have a Z97 motherboard they want to donate? Just saying. Well, that's about it. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, why don't you go ahead and do that. Maybe click the little bell icon, that way you'll be notified whenever I do a new video. You can click over here to watch a new video, or basically where my face hole is, and you can also click up there for some reason. You should try it, see what happens. And, as always, I'll talk to you later.